Night Votkinsk, 1,400 kilometers inside Russia. The alarm sounds at 0340 local time, and nothing is on anyone's radar. By the time the duty guard reaches the window, the first impact has already happened. Building 4, Votkinsk Machine Building Plant. No aircraft on radar, no missile track inbound, no warning tone from the S-400 battery 12 kilometers south. Something struck one of Russia's most protected weapons factories from inside Russia, and it was not on anyone's screen when it happened. This facility does not make tanks, does not make aircraft. It makes Iskander ballistic missiles. The weapon that hit it was built by a group of friends who used to design video games and apartment blocks. What Ukraine has been firing at Russia for the past 6 months is not what most people think it is. Storm Shadow, ATACMS, these are the names in the headlines. Western weapons, American weapons, British weapons, every strike requiring authorization from Washington or London. Before the target could be added to a list, Ukraine was not operating independently. It was operating on permissions, but quietly. In a workshop that looked more like a tech startup than a weapons facility, a group of engineers with no military background were building something that needed no one's permission at all. And the first time Russia found out it existed was when a building they believed was untouchable started burning. 3 entities, 1 weapon system, 1 target Russia could not protect. And a detail at the end of this video that changes what you think you know about how this war gets decided. Ukraine's problem. To understand what the Flamingo is, you have to understand the problem it was built to solve. Ukraine entered this war with no long-range strike missiles of its own, none every ballistic missile in the Soviet inventory Ukraine inherited when the USSR collapsed, signed away, destroyed under the 1994 Budapest Memorandum in exchange for security guarantees that lasted until 2022. So when Ukraine needed to hit targets deep inside Russia, ammunition depots, command posts, airfields loading bombers with glide bombs, the only path was a request. Call Washington, identify the target, wait for approval. Sometimes it came with a list of restrictions, sometimes it came too late. Storm Shadow arrived in 2023, range 250 kilometers. Not enough to reach the logistics hubs Russia had moved east specifically because it knew Ukraine had no reach beyond that distance. ATACMS came in 2024. 300 kilometers, with restrictions on what it could strike inside Russia itself. Russia adapted. It moved its long-range bomber bases. It pushed its ammunition depots further east. It built a buffer zone of distance between its most valuable assets and the front line, betting that Ukraine could never reach them without authorization for every individual strike. That bet looked correct. For 3 years it held. Then, August 2025. A Ukrainian defense company named Firepoint made an announcement that no one in Moscow had expected. Ukraine had built its own cruise missile. Range, 3,000 kilometers. No authorization required. No Western systems involved. No permission from Washington or London needed for any target. The weapon was called the FP5 Flamingo, and the engineers who built it had never worked in defense before. Firepoint, who built the Flamingo. Firepoint is not a defense contractor in the traditional sense. The founders came from construction, architecture, and game design. Not military backgrounds, not aerospace, not weapons development. These were people who understood how systems move through physical space and applied that understanding to a single operational question: what does a missile need to be to survive Russian air defense? And the answer they arrived at was not faster, not stealthier, lower. Russia's air defense network, the S-400, the S-300, the Panzer short-range system, is built to engage targets at altitude. The higher the target, the stronger the radar return. The Iskander ballistic missile Russia fires at Ukrainian cities follows a high arc. It is fast enough that altitude does not matter because the reaction time against it is measured in seconds. Russia built its defense architecture around targets that are either very high and slow or very fast and ballistic. It did not build it for the gap in between. The gap is the low altitude band, below 30 meters above the ground, below the radar line of sight from most ground-based systems. The space where a missile flying terrain following flight can disappear into the Earth's curvature and become effectively invisible to anything not positioned directly in its path. Firepoint built the Flamingo to live in that gap. Target flight altitude 15 to 30 meters above the ground, not above sea level, above the ground, below a 4-story building, moving at 850 to 950. kilometers per hour. The warhead it carries, 1,150 kilograms, heavier than Storm Shadow, heavier than ATACMS, one impact equivalent to a small airstrike, delivered by something Russia cannot put on its targeting screen. The range it reaches, 3,000 kilometers. That number covers 90% of Russia's defense industrial base from Ukrainian territory. Nothing that makes what Russia needs to fight this war is outside the Flamingo's range. Why Russia cannot stop it? Here is the specific problem Russia has. This 400 Triumph is the best air defense system Russia fields. Effective range, 400 kilometers. Effective ceiling, 30,000 meters. Designed to kill everything from fighter aircraft to ballistic missiles at range. The engagement radar that drives it operates at high frequency and is outstanding at detecting targets at altitude. At 15 to 30 meters above the ground, on a terrain-following flight path, the Flamingo gives that radar almost nothing to work with. Ground clutter and radar, return from buildings, trees, terrain features, fills the low-altitude detection band and masks fast movers below 50 meters. To find a cruise missile at that altitude, Russia needs a different kind of radar, a low-level search radar, one specifically positioned to look horizontally rather than up and out. Ukraine has been targeting those specifically. Russia's Nebo-M is its most capable counter-stealth radar, designed to detect low-observable targets. Cost over $100 million per system. Ukraine struck at least one confirmed Nebo-M with an ATACMS strike before the Flamingo had even flown its first major combat mission. When Ukraine's general staff confirmed the strike, they stated directly, the destruction of the Nebo-M radar would create a favorable air corridor for the effective use of cruise missiles. Storm Shadow flies low, Flamingo flies lower. Ukraine was not just firing at targets inside Russia, it was systematically removing the sensors Russia needed to defend against the weapon it was about to reveal. That is the sequence nobody was reporting, and there is one more layer to the problem Russia has. Flamingo's low-altitude capability is currently limited by maps. The missile uses TERCOM navigation, terrain contour matching. It compares what it detects below it against a preloaded terrain map to navigate at ultra-low altitude. Where the maps are complete, the missile flies at 15 to 30 meters. Where coverage is incomplete, it flies higher. Russia knows this. Russia also knows that every month Ukraine's terrain mapping improves, and every month the Flamingo gets lower. The current intercept rate tells the story. Zelensky confirmed in December 2025, of 5 Flamingos fired in one salvo, 1 hit the target and 4 were shot down. That is a 20% penetration rate on that specific salvo. Russia will call that a success, and in one sense it is. In another sense, it means that at current production rates, every 5 Flamingos Ukraine launches, 1 gets through to a target Russia believed was protected. Russia cannot afford to be hit on 20% of its missile production lines every week. The cumulative damage scales with volume. Ukraine is scaling volume. But here is the detail nobody connected. Here is why Votkinsk matters in a way that goes past one building on fire. The Votkinsk machine building plant does not make general weapons. It has one primary product: Iskander ballistic missiles. Russia fires Iskander missiles at Ukrainian cities, at hospitals, at power stations, at apartment blocks. The Iskander is the weapon Russia uses to kill Ukrainians every day. Ukraine just hit the factory that makes it, with a missile built by people who used to design apartment blocks in video games. That is not just a strike, that is a feedback loop. Russia fires Iskanders. Ukraine destroys the plant producing new Iskanders. Russia has fewer Iskanders to fire at Ukraine. The rate of civilian deaths from Iskander strikes is connected, not next week, but over months, to what happened at Building 4 in Votkinsk at 0340 on a February morning. And the factory in Votkinsk is not alone on the target list. The strike record, February 2026, not just Votkinsk. A Flamingo struck a depot near Kotlubon in Volgograd Oblast. The initial impact was contained, but secondary explosions ran for 40 minutes. Ammunition stored in that depot, ammunition being routed toward the front, detonated in sequence as each blast triggered the next. A supply chain for Russian forces was not damaged. It was removed from the board by what the missile ignited. March 2026, Chapayevsk, Samara Oblast. The JSC Promsyntez explosives plant. Promsyntez does not make weapons. It makes the chemical components that go inside weapons. Propellant, explosive fill. The chemical precursors that turn a hollow warhead into a functioning munition. Destroy the explosives plant, and you have not damaged one weapon. You have degraded the production of every weapon that uses what that plant makes. 3 strikes, 3 different target categories: Votkinsk, missile production; Kotluban, ammunition supply; Chapaevsk, explosive components. Ukraine is not randomly selecting targets at maximum range. It is systematically working the Russian defense industrial base, the factories, depots, and chemical plants that keep the front supplied, from a range Russia's air defense cannot consistently cover. Russia's counter and the production race. Russia understood what was happening. In February 2026, a Russian ballistic missile struck a Flamingo production line. Zelensky confirmed it publicly. Output slowed. The line was disrupted. Ukraine rebuilt. Within weeks, production resumed. Russia's most intelligent response to the Flamingo is the same response it has for everything that threatens it. Find it before it becomes decisive. Strike the factory before the weapon reaches a rate where the damage to Russian industry is irreversible. It slowed production. It did not stop it. The production target Ukraine is racing toward tells you how seriously they take the math. Current rate as of mid-March 2026, 3 Flamingo missiles per day, approximately 90 per month. Target rate, 210 per month. That number, 210, is the figure that changes the strategic equation. At 90 per month, Ukraine can sustain pressure on selected high-value targets. At 210, Ukraine can run the kind of saturation operations against Russian industry that change production outputs at a national level. The factories that have not been struck yet are not safe. They are waiting. Russia knows this math. Russia is racing against it, striking production lines, hunting the mobile rail launch trailers that Flamingo fires from before they can reposition. But those trailers are mobile. They do not stay in one location. Finding them is the same problem as finding the Flamingo in flight, a low-observable, fast-moving platform with no fixed position. Russia has not solved either problem. There is one more constraint that matters. Flamingo is not yet accurate enough to be confident against every target type. Zelensky's own December 2025 admission, 1 hit, 4 shot down in a 5-missile salvo, tells you 2 things simultaneously. First, Russian air defense is not helpless. It intercepts Flamingo. Not always, not consistently, but it does. Second, the terminal accuracy and flight profile at current mapping resolution means a percentage of every salvo gets killed before the target. Ukraine is not pretending otherwise. It is building volume to compensate for the intercept rate. Flood the airspace. Make Russia expend interceptors. Make Russia's air defense batteries burn through their magazines, covering targets they cannot leave undefended. While 1 Flamingo is shot down over Volgograd, 3 Flamingos launched simultaneously are dividing that same battery's engagement capacity across multiple tracks. The math changes when volume reaches the point where Russia cannot intercept every missile without depleting defenses it needs elsewhere. Ukraine is not there yet. It is building toward it. Resolution and forward threat. The Flamingo is the answer to a question Ukraine spent 3 years not being able to ask. How do you strike targets 1,400 kilometers inside Russia when every Western missile requires authorization from Washington or London for every specific coordinate on every specific day? The answer turned out to be you build your own. You hire the people who understand how systems move through physical space, architects, game designers, construction engineers, and you give them an operational requirement and get out of the way. Zelensky called it the most successful missile we have. That statement was made in public. About a weapon Ukraine built entirely itself, about a capability that exists completely outside the permission structure that has governed every other long-range strike since the war began. That is the strategic shift, not just in hardware, in autonomy. Ukraine is no longer waiting for authorization to reach the targets that matter. And the targets that matter are not frontline positions. They are not command posts 12 kilometers behind the line. They are factories. 300, 600, 1,400 kilometers inside Russia. The facilities that produce the missiles Russia fires into Ukrainian cities, the plants that manufacture the explosives that go inside those missiles, the depots that store the ammunition heading toward Kharkiv and Zaporizhia. That is the target set the Flamingo was designed for. That is the target set. It is now working. Russia's response tells you how seriously they are taking it. They struck the production line. Zelensky confirmed it. Russia's intelligence found the facility. No small thing, given how Ukraine has concealed Flamingo's production and prioritized it above other targets for a ballistic missile strike. That is not opportunistic. That is a targeted effort to stop a weapon Russia understands is going to scale. They did not stop it. The Vokinsk machine-building plant has been producing Iskander missiles since the 1990s. It is one of the most protected facilities in Russia's defense industrial geography, not just by air defense systems, but by distance. For most of this war, the assumption was that Ukraine could not reach it. 1,400 kilometers, beyond Storm Shadow, beyond ATACMS, outside the permission structure, out of reach. That assumption is gone. What Ukraine hit in February 2026 was not just a building. It was the assumption itself. Russia built a wall of distance between its most valuable facilities and the front line. And a group of architects and game designers working in a facility that looked like a tech startup built something that flew over that wall at 30 meters above the ground and put a 1,150 kilogram warhead through the roof. The wall is gone. Distance is no longer a defense. Every Russian facility inside 3,000 kilometers of Ukrainian territory is now inside range of a weapon being produced at 3 per day and climbing. The Iskander production line struck in February is not the last one on the list. What comes out of Vokinsk in the next 6 months, what gets rebuilt or does not get rebuilt, what rate of Iskander missiles enters Russian service, that number is connected to how many Ukrainian civilians die in the next phase of this war. The feedback loop is running. Russia built a missile to destroy Ukraine. Ukraine built a missile to destroy the factory making it. The factory is on fire.